An introduction some people here may be very familiar with, but nonetheless, I shall do it for the sake of the recording and all the people that want to watch it after as well. So hello everyone, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn series as part of Black History Month here at Queen Mary University of London. Happy Black History Month, as I've been telling all colleagues and friends. And as we draw close to the end of Black History Month, it's great that we have been able to celebrate the contributions, successes, and achievements of the Black community around the world. This year, the theme is Time for Change, Action, Not Words, and that is the national theme taken by Black History Month UK. At Queen Mary, we're proud to showcase our biggest celebration to date with a programme of events, activities, and resources open to all of our staff and students. These talks will celebrate research contributions that focus on race, ethnicity, and culture at Queen Mary. This is a great opportunity to listen, learn, and get food for thought towards making a change that benefits us all. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Dr. John Adenitire, who will be presenting Religion as Liberal Politics. John is a senior lecturer in the School of Law and a fellow in the Institute of Humanities and Social Sciences. Prior to joining Queen Mary, he was a lecturer of law at the University of Birmingham. He completed his PhD at the University of Cambridge, Faculty of Law at Fitzwilliam College. He has taught and researched at Cambridge, Durham, Birmingham, the UCL Constitution Unit, and the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law, and the UK Commission on a Bill of Human Rights. Just for housekeeping, please do keep cameras and microphones off whilst John is presenting, and there'll be an opportunity to engage and ask questions at the end. So without speaking anymore, I'd love to introduce John to deliver his talk today.
Okay, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So as I've been introduced, I'll be giving a talk on religion. It's a paper I've been working on for I think up to 2 years now, and the title is Religion as Liberal Politics. And there I want to ask, what is religion in law? Because I'm a lawyer by training. What's religion in law, and where does our conception of religion in law come from? Okay, so I want to start this talk with a little story, but before I begin the story, I want to show images of the protagonist of this story. So let's see if I can share some images. So here you see a man, a black man. His name is, or the name he chose is John Africa. He lived in the US, in Philadelphia for a few years, and he was killed. He was killed by the police. He was the founder of a movement called MOVE, MOVE, and as part of the movement, this organization, the members of this organization, mostly all black, lived together in the city of Philadelphia. They ate a raw, mostly vegan diet. They believed in exercise, movement, a philosophy of pacifism, though they armed themselves to defend themselves from the police. They believed in opposing modernism as part of their ideology, in returning to a natural state, which is why it was quite important for them to eat foods that were raw and to drink water that had not been treated, to live together. And I tell this story of John Africa because as part of his organization, many of the members of the organization ended up in prison, and they ended up face to face with the law. In fact, not only they ended up face to face with the law, but the law killed them. John Africa, together with 7 other members of the organization, including 5 children, were confronted by the police. The police did not like their ideology, did not like the way they were living, the way that they that they organized themselves, and after several altercations, the police tried to get them out of the building, this communal building that they all shared. A bomb was launched by a police officer to get them out. Fire, the building caught fire, and when the members of MOVE were trying to exit the the building, the police shot them, so they couldn't exit the building, and they went back in. Uh, in the end, they were killed by the fire, which the police have started. Okay, it's a green story, and it gets even grimmer. Not in terms of death, but in terms of the implications of the relationship between MOVE and other ideological organization and the law. So some members of MOVE, um, after the death of John Africa, in particular Mr. Frank Africa, all members of MOVE took the surname Africa, had several altercations to the law, including going to prison. And Mr. Frank Africa um, went to a court of law and asked, because of his need to have a raw diet, to be given this raw diet in prison. Okay, and he claimed that MOVE, the organization of which he was part, was a religious organization, and because it was a religious organization, he had certain rights, such as being able to be given a religious diet, his religious diet, even when in prison. Now, the prison authorities did not like that, did not want to go out of their way to give him a raw diet, so they decided to challenge his identification as a religious person. And this went up to a court, and the court agreed with the authorities and that the move and was not a religious movement. Okay, so not only did the law kill Mr. John Africa, but the law also denied the self-identification as religious to move and to Frank Africa. So he was denied his raw diet in prison. So what I want to focus on is not so much the um, this story which I've begun, but the idea that the law can identify certain people as religious and identify or classify other people as non-religious, and the basis upon which the law does this classification. So in the Africa case, the courts came up with certain criteria for defining who is religious and who is not religious. So one of the first criteria was that I have identified four criteria. So for the courts, and we are talking about U.S. courts, I'll mostly talk about U.S. courts, but this criteria are also shared by other Western courts like Canadian courts and also UK courts. So what are these four criteria? Well, the first criteria is that religion is a belief system. Okay, the system, an ideological system. Secondly, it's not just a belief system in general, but it's one that has to do with existential concern. Right? It's a belief system that addresses fundamental questions about who we are, where we come from, where we're going, etc., etc. So these are the first two criteria. The third criteria is that religion need not, or maybe theistic, right? Need not that belief system need not revolve around God. Okay, so you can have in law an atheistic religion. In fact, some U.S. courts have actually classified some atheists as religious. So the final criteria is that religion is something that is separable from politics. Okay, that doesn't mean that religion and politics cannot intertwine. They often do, but it means that, and I'll say shortly, basically courts cannot impose, courts and not only courts, but public bodies in general, cannot and should not impose theological beliefs or theistic beliefs on any of their citizens. So even though, like in the UK, the head of the king is also the head of the Church of England, there is a established church. It's still the case that religion is separable from politics because um, public bodies, the king, the courts, and the legislature, the executive, cannot force anyone to have a particular view about God or not. Okay. So these are the four criteria. In some religion for Western courts, and I use the Western courts broadly, my research mostly focuses on US, UK, and Canadian courts, as I've said. Western courts classify religion as an existential belief system which need not be theistic and which is separable from politics in the sense that the state cannot impose any religious views on its citizens. So, the question I've been pursuing over the past few years is how come the courts come up with this criteria? One initial suggestion was to think that these are criteria that comes from the own judges' views of what religion is or ought to be. Okay. That is, we look at a certain judgment in a certain time and certain place, and we look at these judges that base their own experience, that base their view of religion on their own experience. However, I think that's a bit too simplistic a view. In fact, this conception of religion, as I will say in a second, in more detail throughout this talk, actually comes from a particular history of ideas. We have inherited in law this conception of religion from two sources, and this is my thesis, it's my main argument, my view. One is that it is an inheritance of the Christian Protestant view. And second, that is not just an inheritance of the Christian Protestant view, but that is also the outcome of the prevailing ideology in the West, which is liberalism. Okay, so this conception of religion is both Protestant and liberal. Okay, so this is my main thesis, and as it happens in academic talk, sometimes you have to have a sparring partner, an intellectual sparring partner. So let me introduce you my intellectual sparring partner. And it's actually a group of them. So some religious studies scholars have been arguing that the conception of religion that we have in the West is a Protestant conception. Okay, the thinkers such as Calvin, John Calvin, and Martin Luther, the reformers, basically gave us this conception. Okay, how did this conception come about? Well, Martin Luther and John Calvin, in their critique and opposition to the Catholic Church, thought that it was imperative for Christians to have creedal knowledge, i.e., to have a knowledge of the beliefs of the Christian religion. So it was no longer good enough, argued Luther and Calvin, that individuals believed or practiced whatever the church told them to do. But it was imperative for Christians to actually know and understand what they were practicing, what they were supposed to be. Yes. And not only understand, but be able to defend the doctrine of their faith. Okay. So there was an emphasis from deference to the authority of the church to individual knowledge of the doctrine of, of Christianity. Okay. And so, as some religious scholars have testified, this polemic against the Catholic Church um, gave rise to a conceptualization of religion as doctrine, as knowledge of theological doctrine. And depending on the content of this doctrine, would have different religions. So, say Catholics believed in transubstantiation, okay, but Calvinists say did not believe in transubstantiation, i.e., the view that um, bread and wine that is given at Mass is the genuine body of Christ. Yeah. So say that there are these differences in theology, okay, then it follows that there are differences in religion. So religion is really principally, of course, not only, but it's principally this system of theological is a system of theological beliefs, right? So and the associated practices that come with these different um, theological beliefs. So you're a Catholic if you believe in transubstantiation, but you are not a Catholic if you don't. You are a Catholic if you believe in saints and and it, and the quasi divinity of Mary. You are a non-Catholic if you do not, etc., etc. So this internal polemic within Christians, which gave rise to this concept of religion as basically belief system that has to do with God and the doctrine associated with God. Okay, was then reflected on other traditions. Okay, um, so say Buddhism, say Hinduism, to the extent that they had theological systems, theological beliefs, then they also formed distinct religions. Okay, this is then say this version of the story I've been giving you is the origins of the UK or of the Western conception of religion. Remember, I told you that Western conception of religion is that it's an existential belief system that was not necessarily theistic and that was separate from politics. But if you are familiar, if you remember these four features, then the origins of the concept of religion that some of these religious studies scholars have been painting seems to be incomplete. At best, this story, the story that goes back to the schism of Christianity, okay, and the crystallization of religion as defending certain theological beliefs and doctrines, can at best explain the first two features of the Western legal conception of religion. Remember those first two features that religion is a belief system and it is an existential belief system. Okay? But there are other two criteria. Remember that religion is separable from politics and that religion need not be theistic. So it seems to me that um, my intellectual sparring partners, this religious study scholars, are missing something. They're only half right, as I say in the paper. That we need other things to explain the totality of the Western legal conception of religion. And that's what I try to do in this paper. I problematize the this account of religion as simply Protestant, arising from the Protestant reformers, and I look to explain the other two features of religion in Western world. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we explain the fact that religion need not be theistic? Or how do we explain religion separability from politics? What I do in the paper is trace a particular history of ideas. Okay, I first look at um, Aquinas. I then look at Calvin. Okay, and I look at Roger Williams, who was a U.S. Um, theologian. Well, he was born in England and then moved to the U.S. The founder of Rhode Island and early defender of religious freedom. Okay, so I trace through these figures the UK conception of religion. So let me go quickly through these three figures to see whether we can explain or at least problematize the account given to us by the religious studies scholars. Okay, so let's take this in turn. Let's start with Aquinas. So Aquinas is a useful person to refer to because he was clearly not a Protestant. Right? He lived much prior to Martin Luther or Calvin. Okay, and yet in his work we can already find seeds of the conception of religion as a belief system. To be fair, in Aquinas defined religion as a virtue, not as a belief system. So Aquinas may not be the best person to trace this our contemporary notion of religion in law. However, even though Aquinas did define religion as a virtue, i.e., a moral virtue, he also had a conception of faith, which is a little bit more similar to the conception of religion that Western cults have today. So, in Aquinas, as I said, religion was understood as virtue, the virtue of worshiping God. It was a theistic conception, and it was one that was centered around worship, acts of devotion to God, the Christian God in this case. So clearly, he did not emphasize belief. Yet, Aquinas had a, a parallel notion, the notion of faith, which for Aquinas was also a moral virtue. Okay, but it was one, the concept of faith, which has to do with beliefs in things of God, right? So faith is a bit more similar to the conception of religion that Western cults hold today, because for Aquinas, faith, as I said, involved beliefs in things of God, such as transubstantiation, the divinity of Christ, etc., etc. So why do I then refer to Aquinas? Well, I use that as a polemic against my intellectual uh, sparring partners to say, yes, as I will say shortly when I discuss uh, Calvin, yes, the Protestant reformer emphasized belief, and so our contemporary conception of religion is indebted to uh, Calvin, for example, and Luther. However, even pre-Protestant reformers and theologians like Aquinas already had a conception of belief an emphasis on belief and propositional knowledge and theological knowledge, albeit in the case of faith, yes, in Aquinas. So Aquinas is already an early progenitor of religion as belief system, even though it uses the cousin word of faith rather than religion. Okay, let's move on in my history of ideas to another figure, the central figure, Calvin. So I could refer to Luther. Luther is writing a bit less systematic than Calvin, so that's why I refer to Calvin, not to Luther. Calvin, in the Institute of the Christian Religion, is magnus opus. That's his most famous writing. Defends the view that my intellectual sparring partners have been giving, i.e., he defends the view that the Christian religion is really a set of propositions, theological propositions, and that it was for the believers, right, to know this proposition. And that's why he wrote the Institute of the Christian Religion, to give to believers this Christian proposition in a very systematic order. So one could find the entirety of the Christian religion in his treatise, the Institute. Okay. So my intellectual sparring partners are right that the conception of religion as belief system, as theological proposition, is indebted to Protestantism. Absolutely. However, it's a little more complex, as I've been suggesting. They may be right that Protestantism can explain the first two features of our conception of religion. But there are other features. The fact that religion is separable from politics needs explaining, and in Calvin's work, this is not found. In fact, Calvin preached the integration of religion and politics. He preached that it was the role of the state, of the ruler, the prince, to inculcate in his subject, the Christian religion. And guess what? Even Aquinas had done the same. He had preached that it was the role of the king to inculcate moral virtue, including the virtue of religion and faith. So Aquinas and Calvin both rejected the separability of religion from politics. So they are not really good. They cannot explain these features that we have in contemporary law, Western definition of religion. Furthermore, Calvin and Aquinas both rejected the idea that religion can be non-theistic. Basically, they both agreed that religion has to do with God. In their case, the Christian God, right? So this idea that the reformers handed down to us our conception of religion is not quite right. Okay, they may have professed, as I said several times now, handed down to us this conception of religion as a belief system, as an existential belief system. So I think we need other figures in the history of ideas to explain why religion need not be theistic, maybe, but need not be theistic, and why it can be separable from politics. To explain the latter, the separability of religion from politics, I want to briefly touch on Roger Williams, who, as I already introduced earlier, was founder of Rhode Island. And he was, in my view, an early liberal. Why was he an early liberal? So there are two features of liberalism as I see them. Okay, one is a belief in individual rights, and the other is of course, individual rights, including freedom, personal freedom, um, perhaps the highest of rights. And the other one is the belief that the legitimacy of political power is down to the individual. Rather, is not to be found in God, but is down to the members of the community, i.e., popular consent, popular sovereignty. And Roger Williams believed in both things. Even though he was an ardent theologian, he was persecuted for his beliefs. He was kicked out of Salem because of his political and theological beliefs. He was an outcast, but he preached, and this was what made him unpopular. He preached for freedom of conscience. Okay, he believed in the view that the state had no role in terms of spiritual salvation. That it was not the role of the state to say whether transubstantiation is right, whether there are such things as saints, whether saints should be venerated or not. And in fact, Roger Williams was even more radical than many of his contemporaries. He lived in the 1600s. He believed that religion was to be found and conscience was to be found in all humanity, not just Christians. Okay, Luther and Calvin, Aquinas very much thought of God as the Christian God. But Roger Williams, because of his belief in pluralism, right, thought that conscience was to be found in all of mankind. And this belief in the worth of humanity, irrespective of whatever gods they believed, led him to advocate for the separation of religion and state, and importantly, to a declaration of religious freedom in his own colony, in Rhode Island colony, which has one of the earliest um, declarations of religious freedom in his charter. Okay, so I think Roger Williams helps us explain the separability of religion from politics, giving his liberalism, giving his commitment to individual freedom, especially individual freedom in matters of conscience, in matters of beliefs that have to do with God. So Roger Williams, like Aquinas and like Calvin, did think of religion as a matter of conscience, as a belief system, but he thought that that belief system was best left to individuals rather than to the state. And this, I think, helps us to explain one of these features of the contemporary Western uh, definition of religion. The separability of religion from politics is indebted to the liberal Roger Williams. But even Roger Williams cannot help us explain the last outstanding feature, which is that religion need not be theistic. Because for Roger Williams, it was very important that his conscience, he was a defender of freedom of conscience, as I've said, conscience was still something that had to do with God. It need not be the Christian God. It could be the God of the indigenous American population. It could be the God of Muhammad. It could be whatever God. But it was still very much thinking of religion and conscience as a theistic, system, belief system. So it cannot really help us, though it can help us explain the separability of religion. Politics, it cannot help us explain why contemporary courts, Western courts, separate God from religion. Why atheists could still be religious. Now, to explain that, we need to come much closer to time. not by reference to one particular figure, but by reference to what courts actually say. Why do contemporary courts say that they do not think that belief in God is essential to religion? They do so because they are liberal. They live in a liberal society. And part of liberal society and the condition for liberalism is belief in ideological pluralism, i.e., the view that there are different ideologies and that this existence of difference in belief system is something valuable, is something that promotes freedom, is a precondition and is a precondition to freedom and is a result of freedom. When people are free, they can form different um, ideological systems. And because they are free, they'll be able to support these different ideological systems. And given the freedom, given this multiplicity of belief systems, individuals are even more free because they have more options open to them to decide what kind of life they want to subscribe to. And so quotes tell us, and this is part of the even the Africa decision with which I started. Yes, they tell us that they don't want to unjustly exclude people from protection of religion just because they do not believe in traditional notions of God. We see this, as I said, in the US, or we see this in the UK, we see this in Canada. Judges are worried that if religion is understood as a theistic system, as a system that has necessitates God, then certain traditions, such as certain branches of Buddhism, Confucianism, Hinduism, perhaps, would be unfairly disadvantaged. They would be excluded from legal protection. And as I say, then, this worry to classify certain individuals as second class citizens because they lack belief in God is linked to their respect for ideological pluralism and with it, liberalism. So, my thesis then is that it is liberalism together with Protestantism that explain the existing features of Western definition of religion. So, it is Protestantism because Protestantism explains this focus on belief system, existential belief system, right? Because what Calvin was doing was to explain the Christian religion in a set of propositions that had to do with God, but not only with God, the relationship between man and God. Okay? And I classify this as an existential belief, right? So these first two features of religion are owed to the Protestant reform. However, the separability of religion from politics is owed to Roger Williams and its liberalism. The fact that the state had to be confined to certain particular things, had to be excluded from imposing theistic belief system or resolving theological disputes. And finally, the fact that religion need not be theistic is explainable by the liberal venerant, the liberal insistence that ideological pluralism is a good thing. So let me finish where we started. If Protestantism and liberalism explain religion, then why was Africa, by that I mean Frank Africa, why was he excluded from the protection of religious freedom? Why was his self conception of self identity as a religious person because it belonged to what he called a religious move, why was it denied? Did I not say that courts, because of their liberalism, want to, and because of their respect for ideological pluralism, want to have as many ideologies as possible as classified as religion? That is true, but it means that certain traditions, certain viewpoints, certain ideologies that do not sufficiently resemble the well-established religions, the big groups, relatively big groups like the Confucian, like the Buddhists, minority practices that have only a few adherents can be put aside because they're not salient enough. So I think, and this is where I finish. Even though I've been able to perhaps suggest where the legal conception of religion comes from, it is both Protestant and liberal. My view is that this conception of religion is incoherent. Once you throw God out of the conception of religion, once you say that religion is basically any existential belief system which need not be theistic and which is separable from politics, then many other ideologies should be, on this definition, counted as religious. Veganism, for example, pacifism, perhaps Marxism. These are, depending on the version, non-theistic systems that tell the relationship between the individual and the universe. They answer existential questions. They are not theistic, or not necessarily all of them, and perhaps not no Marxism. Many of them are separable from politics. Yet courts do not classify these systems, even though they tick all the boxes as religion. So my view, which I will defend perhaps in another talk, is that yes, we can have a history of the legal conception of religion, but that history, even though it explains the feature, cannot justify the feature. The cannot justify our conceptualization of religion. That conceptualization is too broad, it's too incoherent, and importantly, even though I've not specified this in the talk so far, and I've not justified it, it is it is not universal. If we go to different courts outside of the liberal context, say in Egypt, in Iran, they have completely different conception of religion. And they reject all these four features of religion that I have been saying. They reject them altogether in Egypt, in Iran. So, if liberalism is at least in part responsible for the conception of religion that we have, if respect for pluralism, for individual rights, is responsible for the concept of religion the the Western courts use, then I think we should stop thinking about religion in this term. We should instead think about the liberal principle, the liberal values that gave us religion, or gave us this conception of religion. And in law, at least, we should put religion aside. When someone comes to us, say like Frank Africa, and they say, I want a raw diet because of my ideological belief, we should no longer use this idea of religious freedom because religion is incoherent, is unfair to minority practice. What we should do is assess their needs, assess what they need, and if we're able, and if their needs and their philosophies adhere with liberal values, then we should accommodate. Okay, I think that's it for today. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for such an amazing talk. It's given me, like I said at the beginning, so much food for thought. I never heard of the movement or John Africa, so it's really interesting hearing about it. And also, I'd like to congratulate you for sharing research you said that you've been working on for 2 years. So I feel like we've been very privileged to listen to you today. And now I'm going to go away and think about, how liberal principles play into religion and how to almost reconceptualize religion. So thank you. It's been really, really interesting. I hope everyone can join me in giving John a virtual round of applause, and thank you for an amazing talk. And I'd love to open the floor to any questions, comments, or reflections that people have today. I'll go to Alex.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, John. My name is Alex Prestage. I'm Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion here at the university. And thank you so much for sharing your research, your reflections. As a speaker, I could listen to you for hours. You've given me so much food for thought, and so much of it seems relevant to the equality, diversity and inclusion profession at the moment, particularly in the UK and our legislature, around religion and belief, and what is protected and what might not be protected. And as you sort of round up there, evoking ethical veganism and gender critical views, and where the bounds of liberalism almost it turns in on itself, where how do we tolerate intolerance within the bounds of law? Yeah, I don't know if you have any reflections on how that's playing out within the UK and our legislature at the moment.
Yeah, so they are very interesting, and thank you, Alex, for your comments and your questions. There are some interesting developments. On the one hand, as you said, there are certain popular views that are being recognized and defended in anti-discrimination legislation, such as ethical veganism. But I think to continue the theme of my talk, some of this is just incoherent. So, say ethical veganism is considered as a philosophical belief, which is worth protecting in discrimination law. But some employment tribunals have held that vegetarianism is not a belief system that that necessitates protection, on the grounds that vegetarianism is not compelling enough. It's not as compelling as veganism. Now, that may well be true. Philosophy of veganism may be more coherent than vegetarianism, say. But both seem to me to be compelling, and at least their rejection of animal exploitation or something like that, and at least to some extent. So the incoherence that we have at the larger level of understanding what religion is on the first place is then trickles down to the actual judgment that we have. For example, protecting veganism but not protecting vegetarianism. So the old system seems to me to need a rethink. Of course, he also mentioned the protection of gender critical beliefs as a protected category, which certain courts and tribunals, including courts of appeal, I think, are found to be protected. And I guess my view on this is as follows. I think it's fine to have a wide range of ideologies that are protected. So rather than exclude vegetarianism from protection, then we should include it. Rather than exclude gender critical beliefs from protection, then we should also include. And the reason for this is because we need to make recourse to the liberal values, the first instance, right? So liberalism is the ideology that we should have a multiplicity, among other things. We should have a multiplicity of ideologies, right? And protect them. And the only condition is that these ideologies should not, especially when they are practiced, should not interfere with fundamental rights of other people. Right? And so it's fine to protect gender critical beliefs as a general category, right? But when practiced in a way which undermines the fundamental rights of others, then that's the stage in which this state should intervene, right? So if a gender critical person is just defending their ideology on Twitter, then that's fine. That's part of freedom of speech, freedom of belief is a belief system, however compelling or disgusting you find it, and that's fine. Of course, it's something else whether when a gender critical person actually physically attacks, say, a trans person, or mounts a campaign of vivification of trans people. So I hope that answers kind of your.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, John, for answering. I can see Isabella has their hand up. Thank you, Isabella, for joining us today as well.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic, John. Thank you so much. I'm really glad I signed up in my lunch break to come today. But John, I have huge issues with how the concept of God and religion is actually deep-rooted in racism. And how, although the concept of liberalism and and the inclusion is not coming through when it comes to religions, is deep rooted in colonialism, is deep rooted in racism. There is the concept is being used, the religious concept is being used in many forums where it actually does divide people into dominant group and and introduce oppression. So I just wanted to see your opinion about why religion was always connected or linked to politics. Why is it being used to divide people? Thank you.
Hello.
Sorry, could you hear me?
Hi. Sorry, I just logged off for a minute there. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry about that. Can carry on with your question?
No, I just wanted to ask your opinion about the connection between religion and oppression and racism, and how can we move away? How can we, move away from racism and oppression when we think about religion? Why there is always connection between politics and religion?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. Very very big question. So one way to answer, and try to be more modest in my answer, is to look at particular cases in which religion is used to further racist politics. So, say and that's why I focus today on Frank and John Africa. This was and the move ideology. It was a movement, mostly a black movement in the United States. I think it was in the 70s, 80s, right, especially in Philadelphia. And it was clear that there was systemic racism and just direct racism at play involved in the killing of these of the members. But then the racism was perpetrated even further afield, right, in the judicial system when Frank Africa was denied a religious diet. And when you read the judgment and you read the opposition by the prison authorities uh, to this request, which seems to be a modest one, the reasons are just it's not possible to understand them. So, for example, Move was a theistic conception. They believed in God. They are the Bible, a sacred text. So even if you disagree with my view that we should, get rid of religion in law, then you should be very moved with the way in which the legal concept of religion is used in the Africa case, perpetuate disadvantage against black people in this particular context. But my argument is even more general, that this conception of religion is used to disadvantage certain people, people that cannot tick all the boxes that judges have inherited from a particular history of ideas. Our histories of ideas could have been different, and this conception of religion that we have is not particularly compelling. And so we use this conception of religion to then disadvantage marginalized communities, already marginalized communities, that struggle to fit into the boxes. And so my view is that we should get rid of this box altogether. That we should, well, that equality could be further improved if we stop talking about religion altogether and we started talking about freedom of belief, freedom of function, freedom of association. Perhaps we'll be closer to a fairer society. That doesn't mean that racism would decrease necessarily, right? The other concepts can be used perhaps in a way to disadvantage communities, like free speech sometimes is used as a justification for denigrating marginalized communities. So this is not a perfect solution, but I think it will move us closer to a fairer society.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Isabella, for such an interesting question. And again, thank you, John, for answering. I just wanted to see if anyone else had any questions or reflections in the interest of time. And if not, then we can thank John for an amazing session today. I'm going to take the silence as a no. So thank you all for attending today's Lunch and Learn. As I said, it's been really insightful. It's given me so much to think about and go back and reflect for my area of work, leading race equality, and my personal interests around religion and liberalism. So I hope colleagues can join me once again in thanking John for an amazing Lunch and Learn. And please do share the recording and the series when available, because it's been absolutely amazing. So thank you, John.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Take care, guys. Thank you.